flies are attracted to the birds, and you get these big piles of maggots on the birds. And as those birds are out there floating, those maggots start to disperse around those carcasses.
This is a news clip describing a botulism outbreak in California.
And the birds are attracted to all the dead birds, thinking it's other birds on the water, and they start to feed on the maggots in the water. So you get this constant feedback of birds being attracted to an area, feeding on the infected area.
And here's one about declining salmon runs.
A new report from the Department of California Fish and Wildlife shows only 2.6% of the winter run Chinook salmon juvenile population survived the brutally hot and dry summer.
And one describing California wildfires.
That's right, more than 2.25 million acres burned in California this year already.
And another giving an update on the ongoing drought.
Now to some concerning news about our state's most valuable resource, water. The Department of Water Resources' final snow survey out of the season is out today, and its numbers are not showing any promise. Now the state must prepare for a third straight year of drought.
Taken all together, things can seem pretty dire for outdoorsmen and women in California. On top of the state's climate issues, you can add restrictive firearms and ammo laws, plus the threat of ballot initiatives to ban certain types of hunting to the list of major hurdles that outdoorsmen face. Lastly, you can look at the historic decline in hunter numbers, and suddenly this question becomes legitimate in California. Can hunting survive here? And just as importantly, if it can't, who's going to pay for the state's wildlife and habitat conservation? In hopes of getting some answers around this doomful line of questioning, we sent Christine Peterson, who loves a good doomsday scenario, to California to talk with hunters, wildlife managers, and conservation groups about what's going on in their state. She started her reporting, fittingly, by waiting in a sweat line.
Like, oh shit. Yeah. Oh, are they calling numbers?
Yeah, resis.
They're calling resis right now. There's a lot of resis showing up.
What about 14 and 15?
Right?
Yeah, we'll be going in together.
Yeah. Perfect.
Can you start out with explaining exactly what a sweat line is?
I can. It is complicated. Like a lot of things revolving around hunting in California. So if you want to duck hunt in California, if you want a public land duck hunt, you have to put in for reservations before the season begins. And you draw or you don't.
Okay.
If you drew, great. You show up the morning of the hunt, you go and hunt. Everything's fine. If you didn't draw, then you have to show up the night before you want to hunt at 6 p.m., put your name on a list. And then there's a lottery that evening. So at about 8 o'clock, you check online what number is associated with your name. Nice work pulling 7. And you're 7, right? That's a lucky number.
That's it. It was meant to be.
Yeah, right.
And he drew, the original number he got was number 27 in the lotto. Okay. And I told him, you got lucky number 27. You end up with a 7, lucky 7.
If you have a low enough number, like number 7 or number 8, up to about 40, it means you have a reasonably high chance that when you show up the next morning, you're going to get on. Because they give a certain number of reservations ahead of time, and then they reserve a certain number for this process. And then there's also people who don't show up for the reservation for whatever reason. So if you've got a number like 50 or 60 or 70, you start to run that calculation in your head that you may not get on. You might, if enough people don't show up, maybe the weather's bad. So you go and you show up at 4:30, and you start waiting for numbers to be called. Number 1, number 2, hunt parties check in, they go out. As the numbers get higher, the spots fill up, and then eventually it's full. So let's say they fill up at number 40, and then you can stand in line and wait for someone to leave. And then it just becomes person in, person out, person in. So as hunt parties go, you get to go in. And that is called then the sweat line. And some people will wait till noon to get on. I talked to somebody not that long ago, said one of the last hunts of the season, she waited until noon. That was when she finally got on, and she still shot her limit of ducks. So she still had a great time, even though she stood there from 4 in the morning until noon, stood there or sat in her car. But you have to be there, because if they call your number and you're not there, they just skip you and they go to the next number.
Okay, this is vastly different from any sort of duck hunting experience on public land that I'm used to. Like, what this sounds like to me is when Apple releases like a new phone and there are all the people who are like waiting outside of a Best Buy to get the first.
Yes.
Is that kind of the vibe of what this is like?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you make them nerdy about ducks and not nerdy about phones and put them in camo. But yeah, I mean, it's that same kind of like, you know, you got to be there to win. You show up and then you wait.
And if we're trying to tell the story of hunting in California, why does it make sense to kind of start with this sweat line type of hunt?
I think because it's one of the best ways to show how hard hunting can be in California, though still very worth it. And it also shows how much people want to hunt in California. There are a lot of people that want to hunt ducks in California because California has phenomenal duck hunting. So it might be a pain in the ass, but there's a lot of people that are willing to do it because it's just that good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about like some incredible opportunity there. And the reason why hunting in California is so interesting, I think, on top of the opportunity is just the immense challenges that hunters in the state are facing. In the story that you wrote this: the list of obstacles looming before Golden State hunters reads like a doomsday letter. Megafires close millions of acres of forest during deer season and consume precious quail habitat. Urban sprawl eats up increasingly large sections of wildland. Drought turns reservoirs to puddles and puddles to cracked earth. Duck populations struggle, deer numbers plummet, predator populations expand. Ammunition becomes harder to find and much more complicated to purchase. And then the possibility of a ballot initiative banning hunting lingers on in a state with 70% fewer hunters than it had 50 years ago. That is a lot to take in.
It is.
So let's maybe start with the most dramatic part. This idea of a ballot initiative that would ban hunting in California. Is that even possible?
I mean, not really. To be fair, I stopped predicting politics like a long time ago. I have no idea. People will do crazy things we can't know. So is it legally possible that there could be a ballot initiative and somehow enough people could sign it to, you know, get it on a ballot and then enough people vote for it? I guess. I mean, that could happen. But from everyone I talked to, that seems super, super unlikely. You know, almost 290,000 people hunt in California, and a lot of very wealthy people hunt in California. And so while a lot of Californians don't hunt, plenty of them also understand hunting for food, and food is very important to Californians. And so it isn't, you know, the likelihood that mountain lion hunting was banned 40 years ago, 50 years ago, so you haven't been able to hunt lions for a long time. And someone who follows this really closely and is a multi-generation Californian said to me once when I was reporting this that if you want to hunt something that looks like someone's cat or dog, so like a mountain lion, a bobcat, a coyote, a wolf, or a bear, you may eventually be out of luck. Like those species, because that's something that non-hunters have a harder time identifying with. But California is never going to ban full-out hunting. They're duck hunting, deer hunting, these species that you hunt for food. That's something that plenty of non-hunters in California get and don't have an issue with.
Gotcha. But it's not totally insane to at least talk about. Basically because the percentage of hunters in California is so low, right? Like what is it, less than 1%?
It is, yeah, like 0.7%, I think the last time I looked. So yes, it is very low. It's one of the lowest in the country, if not the lowest.
Gotcha. And then on top of that, like it's not unprecedented to have these kind of wild ballot initiatives like the one that we're seeing in Oregon, for example.
Right. Yep. No, there is a ballot initiative right now in Oregon that's trying to, and I'd have to look at the language. It technically is more addressed toward farm animals, but when you read through it, it's addressing killing, taking, hurting, wounding wildlife also. And so that would include hunting. And that's, they have not gotten enough signatures to get it on the ballot in Oregon, but it's a thing and it's there. So yes, I mean, ballot initiatives happen.
So we have to be on guard all the time.
This is Dan Weisenhunt, president of the California Deer Association.
And right now, this is getting dangerously close, I feel, being that they're actually collecting signatures in Oregon, and they'll probably get enough signatures to put it on a ballot. If it was something that was brought to the voters and it was billed as a farm animal cruelty bill, it was kind of hidden behind that, I could see something like that passing on a ballot here in California.
Okay, so implausible, but not totally impossible. Let's move on to maybe the more realistic scenario, which is just a variety of pressure points, kind of downward pressure on hunting opportunity in California, just making it harder and harder for everyday hunters. For example, you mentioned the ammunition restrictions. What is it like for hunters trying to get guns and ammo in California, and why is that a hunting access issue?
It is hard. So to buy ammo in California, you have to have a firearm registered at your current address, or else pay $19 for a background check, which takes a few days, which is complicated enough to begin with, right? Like, I don't actually even remember where I was living when I bought my first gun in Wyoming, but it certainly is not where I am living now. And so for people who are living in apartments or have to move around for work or wherever, they're switching their homes a fair bit. That's already a complicated process to make sure that you've got your firearm registered to your current address every time you move. And when they first passed this, in the first few months of implementation, 1 in 5 people didn't pass. And that meant tens of thousands of people in California initially were stopped from buying ammo because they couldn't pass a background check. And many of those failed attempts were because the person had moved since they'd last purchased, or there were a lot of issues with their name in the database not matching the name on their driver's license, and so then they weren't allowed to purchase it. And most of them were not flagged for a legitimate incident like felony charges or something like that would disqualify them. Most of it was just like a paperwork error or something like that. And so then if you think about you're a new hunter and you have a firearm, but you don't have any ammo, and you hadn't thought about trying to stockpile it before the ammo shortage happened.
Yeah.
You can borrow ammo from a friend in the field. Like if you and I are out chasing ducks, you can hand me a few shells. You can't drop a box by my house the night before and I go hunt on my own or with someone else.
Really?
No, you can give it in the field, but you can't pass it along that way. And so then that's just, as we have talked about and everyone in our world has talked about, hunting is already kind of weird to figure out how to do when you're new to it. And there are hurdles. And then this is just one more thing of trying to figure it out, especially then when you put an ammo shortage on top.
There's a Cabela store in Reno, just across the border, that gets a lot of California traffic. There's a Bass Pro Shop store in Rockland, another one in Manteca. Yeah. And there's value to this market. There's a lot of money that's made here and a lot of money that is to be made. But all that'll go away if we have politics like this that goes through. And if we let it get a foothold, it'll grow like a cancer.
We'll be right back after the break. Okay, let's talk about the big one. And I'm talking about climate change.
Yeah.
California has been in the news for years with stories about the state just being ravaged by the effects of climate change. So what are some of the main ways that this is impacting hunting and hunting opportunity?
Almost every way. Like it is for people in other states, but much more dramatically in California. After some of the biggest fires at the end of the summer last year, all national forests in California closed to the public for like a chunk of September and I think a little bit later. So, that means nobody's deer hunting for that period of time in any national forest. California's got a huge amount of national forest land. Mm-hmm. And so that is a huge hurdle. And then there is drought and ducks that don't have their stopover points anymore and have less nesting habitat. It was so bad in 2020. There was a botulism outbreak that killed 60,000+ ducks because the water levels had dropped so low at wildlife refuges. And so there are fewer good places for wildlife to be, which means less wildlife for hunters. So in a lot of ways, you name an impact from climate change, and California in some way is experiencing a lot of it.
The botulism itself, the bacteria in the soil, can be naturally found in certain areas. But what makes this more man-made or man-caused is the water that's been diverted from this region. And then also loss of habitat. So you're concentrating all these migrant birds in this one area that they rely on, and there's not enough water.
This is getting a little dark here. Your doomsday scenario is feeling a little too real. So how about some good news at this point? Like, there's still a lot of hunters in California.
Yeah.
There's lots of opportunity, as you mentioned, lots of public land and a wide variety of game species. Does it feel like the hunting community in California is still relevant and active?
It does. And I mean, I, to some degree, was limited by the fact that I was talking to hunters. So I was seeking hunters. But there was a stat given to me at one point that the county with the largest percentage of hunters in California, the largest number of hunters, was LA County, which is surprising. Yeah. But there's still, again, there are almost 290,000 people who hunt in California. And to give some frame of reference, Wyoming, which is where I'm from and has a really very rich, robust population of hunters, we have 131,000 hunters. Alaska has 90,000 hunters. South Dakota, which has one of the highest per capita rates in the nation, has 212,000. So still dramatically fewer hunters than are in California. And they still also have a huge number of huntable species. So yes, I mean, to say that hunting isn't a thing in California would for sure be inaccurate. There are a lot of people that hunt, and there's still a lot of really great habitat and a lot of ducks and a lot of deer. So there's still a lot of species that can be chased and are doing well. Yeah. Well-ish.
Yeah. And then the other part of that, obviously, is that hunting is still really important from a conservation funding standpoint, right?
Right.
Like, if the state has incentive to keep, a vibrant hunting community, because without it, how would California pay for its natural resources?
I mean, nobody knows for sure. They're, to some degree, in the process of figuring it out. Right now, hunters and anglers pay for about 25% of California's fish and wildlife budget. And this gets complicated fast when you start looking at state budgets and how money is appropriated. As a reference, Wyoming, say 85 to 90% of the state's game and fish budget is paid for by hunters and anglers. So almost the entire thing is license fees and then excise taxes. So in California, it's about a quarter, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the budget is $800+ million a year. And they're required to do a lot of things. Like, their Fish and Wildlife Department runs the cannabis program. So there's a lot of things that California is required to do. And hunters and anglers they pay for a lot of it, less than other states. And I asked a lot of people what happens if that money is gone, and even the state's not sure. Right now, they get a lot of their money from the general fund and then some other, a whole bunch of other pots for different things. But they don't know. They don't know where it would come from.
Yeah. So yeah, just to follow up on that. So about 25% is coming from, from license fees to support the state Fisheries and Wildlife Program. The other 75%, that's just coming from the general fund, or how are they getting that?
A chunk of it is a general fund, but I think there's 60 other sources. So all these other pots of money, a wildfire resilience fund, or, they have to pay for turtle conservation. And there's money that comes from a oceans fund for that. So there are a lot of places that money comes from other than the general fund too.
Gotcha. So I'm gonna hit on now what I think is a concern for, a lot of diehard hunters who are kind of well versed in conservation funding concepts, which is what you just described as like hunting license fees are kind of mixed in the larger pool of conservation funding, right? So there's a lot of different sources of revenue, a lot of different sources of funding, all going toward the state's conservation programs. And I think that a lot of folks will worry that if the revenue coming from hunting declines too much and becomes too small of a piece of the pie, then what incentive does the state have to pay for hunting access or pay for hunting opportunity? And maybe is that a legitimate concern from folks who are like, yeah, we still have a lot of hunters, but our influence within, state politics and policy is declining because our share of the revenue pie has gotten too small for us to actually make any difference.
I mean, it's a great question, and it's one that I asked a lot of people in this, and answers are all over the map. The state says, no, of course, they're still going to be supporting, as long as there are hunters out there, they're going to be supporting it. And just because it's a smaller piece of the pie doesn't mean that they're not also benefiting from where this revenue is coming from. Like the wildfire fund, I mean, there's millions of dollars that goes into helping protect forests and helping do forest restoration. And while that might be for wildfires, that certainly is helping wildlife, and hunters are benefiting from that. Access is an interesting point, and I don't know that I know the answer to that, and I'm not sure that anybody necessarily knows the answer to that, though that certainly is a valid concern, that if hunters continue to be a smaller and smaller and smaller piece of it, does their voice carry as much weight? The state would say yes, and others could say no, and I don't know that either one is right or wrong right now.
Yeah, the other thing that you'd mentioned earlier in this conversation is that there's a good amount of wealthy hunters in California, and certainly on the waterfowl side of things, these kind of private landowners who are really interested in hunting and really interested in conservation, they're taking up a bulk of the conservation funding through their own projects, right? And that's got to be an important part of just what's going on in the state in general. Especially when you start talking about ducks and waterfowl, private landowners are a huge part of the story of ducks having water in a state that is as drought-ridden as California. One of the guys in the story, Larry Gurry, he spends, I don't know how much money, honestly, every year keeping water on his property and then also paying to pump water to neighboring properties.
When we bought that land, we knew the Little Dry Creek Wildlife Area, that's like the number one spot in the state for the mallards and good hunting here.
Oh, interesting.
And so we took that and we converted that into rice. But we created a big sanctuary there, 120 acres. It's not hunted, and it holds a lot of birds going back and forth. And we only hunt it, twice a week. I think a lot of people don't realize with the hunters, I mean, you got to be gentle on the property, otherwise you're not going to have any birds. And so you get, plenty of time for those birds to rest and feed and give them a place to go to.
And so they are an interesting piece of this also, and also part of the reason why hunting's probably not going to go away in California or be banned, because there is a lot of money behind hunting. But yes, the wealthy landowners and clubs that will pay the $1 million, $2 million buy-in to be part of these clubs, and then $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to help pay for water and keep habitat good. That's supporting all the ducks that are rolling through and geese that are rolling through California.
Yeah, when you were out there, you saw some of these properties. Just talk about what it was like. You got to go hunting on Larry's place. A lot of ducks there, right?
Yes, there were. I mean, he is holding a lot of ducks on his land for sure.
I love all the sounds out here.
Right.
Most of the birds I was here last week kind of scouting. Normally I could go down there further, but they're lacking water, and it seemed like it was more concentrated, and they were just getting up all over in this direction here.
It was obvious what that investment was giving him.
Yeah.
And it was giving him a lot of ducks and geese.
Did they all just settle back down again then?
Yeah.
That's crazy. But there's so many.
Some of them flew out, but they're not.
So kind of along these lines, you talk to a whole variety of hunters in California. How do they feel about hunting in their state, and do they think that it has a strong future? Are they excited about it, or is there a lot of kind of hand-wringing going on?
Like everything, it depends on who you talk to.
Yeah.
But I do think there are some who are very worried and are doing a lot of hand-wringing and trying to sound the alarms for people.
We're fighting an uphill battle here that it's almost like the frog in the pot of water, that you don't know that it's boiling until it's already boiling. And we're getting to the point where it's getting close to boiling, and we're going to die.
But the bulk of the just average, the ones who aren't professionally working in the industry, who aren't keeping track of these things really closely and whose job it is to fuss about it, the just average hunter, They gripe for sure. They'll bring up issues, but most of them love California and they love hunting in California, and they have a lot of success hunting in California. They want to stay, and there's a lot of public land, and you'll hear stories. There's plenty of people who are leaving California, some because of the hunting and probably a lot because of cost of living policies and other stuff that makes California just a tougher place to live. But there are still a lot of people that live in California and hunt in California and are excited about a future of hunting in California.
Constantly having to fight for it. And I think that's what makes people leave, is they want to go to a place where they don't have to fight and where they don't feel like people look at them all sideways because you kill animals.
This is Holly Heiser, an avid California duck hunter and former communications director for the California Waterfowl Association.
You go to other towns and there'll be signs up that say welcome hunters. It's like, you know how nice it is as a Californian to see a sign that says welcome hunters?
Is that not a thing here?
No.
Those are around year round in Wyoming.
Yeah, so that's the stuff it wears on people.
Why do you think for folks who don't live in California and don't have, big plans or dreams of going to hunt there, why do you think what's going on there is relevant for, say, like a deer hunter in, maybe Colorado, or, maybe a waterfowl hunter in a state like Massachusetts?
I think it's important to keep track of what's going on with trends in other states, and especially a state like California. And this is the argument that you hear from the folks who are really worried that California sets trends. It does. It's a massive state. It has 40 million people. It's geographically is a huge area. And it tends to set trends for the rest of the country. Not always, but it does. And so I think it's important to keep track of what's going on there to see what kind of impact it could have on your state. I think it'll be interesting to see if hunter numbers drop, which they had a little spike during COVID in California, and maybe that continues. Maybe they stay, maybe they keep dropping. But if they keep dropping, it will be interesting to see how the state does deal with that in terms of supporting habitat and access that supports hunters, because those are going to be good lessons for other states.
Yeah, it sort of feels like it maybe challenges our traditional idea of like the user pays North American model of wildlife conservation, which is like, the state provides hunting opportunity for the public and holds wildlife in the public trust, and hunting licenses and fishing licenses go to supporting that work and that programming and all of the wildlife. And I think something that hunters are very proud of is like, hey, we pay for all of this. Our recreation is also conservation just in the act itself. But if the amount of money we're contributing to that conservation programming becomes so small, like how much of that story is true anymore? I think that's where I start to feel uncomfortable with, with this future where there's so few hunters per capita, kind of in any place.
Yeah, I think that is a valid concern, depending on who you talk to and depending on how apocalyptic you want to feel about it, because you can worry about it on that side. It can also be, there's some states like Wyoming, which has enshrined the right to hunt, fish, and trap in its constitution. So hunting in Wyoming, not going to go anywhere, right? But I do think that it does get harder, and there are a lot of species that need money and need habitat work. And there's a small pot. And so if hunters become less of that, then maybe there are fewer biologists that work on deer, and that money is put somewhere else. I don't know. That is the concern. And
right.
If that happens, I don't know that we can know. I don't know that we can know how that'll play out exactly, but it's worth keeping track of.
Yeah, certainly. Okay. I think I want to feel less apocalyptic. I think it's going to be okay.
I do also. It is easy to get dark, especially listing all of the downsides. But there's still, even in a state like California where 0.7% of its population hunts, again, there are still a lot of people that hunt, and there are still a lot of species, and there's still a lot of good habitat. And they got a bump during COVID, and maybe those hunters are going to stick with it. And California's got quite a foodie culture, and wild game is a thing. So maybe it won't be so dire. It might be fine.
Sit in the parking lot.
And your first duck today.
Because I was telling him this morning, I was like, it's not about us today. It's not about the birds. It's not about hunting. It's just about you having a good time.
That's it.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited and produced by our senior deputy editor, Natalie Krebs. And it's hosted by me, editor-in-chief Alex Robinson. Reporting in this episode is by Christine Peterson. We use news clips from the Sacramento Bee, ABC 7 News, ABC 10, and 23 ABC News. Music in this episode is by Harrison Black, Zep Jamison, and Emerson Lee, all via APM Music.